Okay, we are now picking up where we left off. We're getting closer to the end of the apology, about the life of Socrates. So Socrates says that he does not fear death or poverty or unpopularity. Okay, I'm returning to the point about the power of philosophy. So Socrates has learned things in philosophy that make him unafraid of things that almost everyone else is afraid of, and that affect people's behaviors, not just an internal fear, but someone might rat on a friend because they were feared death or other punishments. People might be lobbyists for shady companies in the government in a way that harms all fellow citizens for money because they're scared of poverty. And people all the time bend over backwards and sell out their very own self in order to avoid unpopularity, to remain in with the in crowd. Right? So Socrates has learned ideas which have reduced his fear. And here's what's interesting about this. If you don't fear death, people can't threaten you with the punishment of death. If you don't fear poverty, they can't threaten you by taking away your money. And if you don't fear unpopularity, they can't threaten you by saying people won't like that, you better not do it. So Socrates cannot be harmed in ordinary ways. He can't be harmed by death or poverty or unpopularity. This makes him like Daenerys in the Game of Thrones. You know how she can't be harmed by fire? Almost everyone else in the world can be harmed and killed by fire, but not her. She's like a superhero, basically, right? Well, Socrates is like a superhero as well. He's like Daenerys Stormborn, but he's, Socrates philosophy born or something, right? He cannot be harmed by ordinary threats. And it's not just, he was born unafraid. It's that he's learned ways to be unafraid. Okay? So part of what I want to say here is that philosophy, because it deals with values, not just with facts about what's true. You're going to die someday, that's a fact. But it deals with values. Should you be scared of dying? Is dying a good thing, a neutral thing, or a bad thing? Values are always when you say that something is good or bad and it's worth something or means something. So anything can show you facts. A biologist can show you the facts about what it means for a human to die. But only philosophy is really good at showing you the value of these things. Okay? Philosophy can help you understand what you personally should really care about and what you can just let go. So, for instance, the fear of death. Socrates found a way to let go of the fear of death. He also, and this may be of even more relevance, especially for young folks in my class, but the fear of unpopularity, he also got rid of that fear. Remember, he knows that what he does is not well liked. He's not going to get a bunch of followers on Facebook, right? He's not going to get a bunch of Twitter mentions. Not good ones, at least, because of the way he acts. Now, if he was scared of that fact, which he knows, or if he said that it had a value of being bad, he would change his behavior, and he wouldn't have been the Socrates we love and admire and respect. He would have been just another troll on Twitter. Okay? The point is, you probably have some fears that drive your behavior. I know I do. You probably have some fears that are driving your behavior in ways that you don't like, but you're scared and you feel forced to do something you don't want to do because of your fear. Philosophy can help you let go of those fake fears that are driving you. Those fears that aren't the real you. They're not about you and what you want, but about this thing that you're scared of. Philosophy can help you let go of those fears. Okay? And here's a new twist. Okay? Socrates says on page 12, he says, if you kill me, you're not going to find another person like me very easily. He's one of a kind, right? Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's one of a kind. So this is something else that Socrates says, and that I will say philosophy does for us. The truth made Socrates rare and unique. It made it so it's hard to find someone like him. Philosophy can also make it where you're unique and you're not like everybody else. Okay? So think about it this way. When we talk about Socrates, we don't use a bunch of adjectives or character types to describe him. We let him show his uniqueness in his own life. He is so unique that we name things after him. The Socratic method is named after him, not the other way around. Okay? There's a whole style of writing philosophy called the Socratic dialogue. Not just Plato, but other people, Xenophon is one of them, wrote philosophy in this way where it's a dialogue with people. We name that after Socrates. This is how rare and unique he is. Things get named after him. But the normal way of living, you're named after something else. Oh, he's a jock. She's a jock. She's a prep. He's a prep. That person's a hick. That person's rich. We get named after categories, and people can understand us snap like that in an instant through our categories. But Socrates, if you try to explain him through categories, I guess you could say he's old, right? He's old, he's Greek, he's a philosopher. That you can't really, that doesn't tell you anything. The only part of that tells you something about him is philosophy, and it's exactly philosophy in him that made him unique. So instead of being able to summarize him or categorize him through all these other things, oh, he's a this, he's a that, right? He is unique and singular. He is his own meaning, not some general category of other things. Okay? And once more, philosophy can help you do that. But so far, I've not really proven or shown why. So remember what Socrates says on page 12. This is also very famous, and it'd be a shame if you didn't get this out of your intro to philosophy class. Socrates says, I'm like a gadfly. Well, what's a gadfly? Gadfly is like a horsefly or like a biting fly. And he says, my beautiful city of Athens is like a beautiful, noble horse. It's powerful, but it's sleeping right now. He says it's not living up to its full potential. So the big, beautiful horse is bit by the little, ugly fly. The annoying, painful fly bites it, but only bites the horse to rouse it to greatness, to get it to wake up so that it won't, as he says on page 12, sleep away the rest of its days. Okay. Socrates says, look, what's easy, and so what most people do is they go along with what's happening around them, partly because they're scared to be unpopular. They don't want to go against what's popular or what's customary. Another reason it's easy to go along with whatever is around you is because other people say they know the truth. And when you don't know the truth about something or you're ignorant about it, of course you go along with someone who says they know the truth. Which means that one person says they know the truth in a big group of people, and then a bunch of us believe them. Now, if a bunch of us believe the same exact thing, we're similar to the extent that we believe the same thing. So what Socrates says, it's very common, it's very easy in a group of people to go with what other people are doing. But if you're going along with what other people are doing, you're not uniquely, truly yourself. You're not different from them. You're just another cog in the machine. You're just another part of this big horse that is the city. But Socrates has removed himself from the common beliefs and opinions of other people. Instead of having popular activities and ideas, like most people do, he has unpopular activities and ideas. So he is outside of the mass of people. He's on the edge of the horse that is the city. And that's why he's unique. But it took work, right, to pull himself. Everyone thinks that they're unique, but notice what we say there. Everyone thinks that they're unique. But most of us have a lot in common with most other people. So we're unique a bit, but we're mostly the same as other people. But Socrates is outside. So that's why he's like the gadfly. In his difference, he says, you don't have to be like me, but are you sure you want to be just like them? If not, he's the gadfly. He bites you. He wakes you up. It's like the Matrix. It's almost exactly like the Matrix. Those directors drew on philosophy, including Plato, for their ideas. Okay, one has to wake up from the everyday, the common, the easy. And again, one way to do that is philosophy. Okay. So, next point. Socrates says, I'm not scared of death. Now, remember, he gave a reason before. He said, it's a little weird to be scared of something if you don't know what it is, because to be scared of something is to say it's bad. That's all it is. If you say something's bad, or you say you're scared of something, you're implying that it's bad. Okay? And he says, if you don't know what something is, you don't really know if it's good or bad, so why be scared of it? Okay, that was a philosophical proof he gave there. He also, though, gave proof in his life that he's not scared of death. So for Socrates, ideas and actions always blend together. One leads to the other, and they fit together. He doesn't do one thing and say another. He says something and does the same thing. So he says, I know it's true that I don't fear death. And then he says, look at my actions. 3 times just in this reading, you can see Socrates prove through his behavior that he does not fear death. One time is that during the political turmoil right before this, he would not fetch a man who they wanted to falsely kill. He said, that man's not guilty and deserving of death. I won't go get him, even though the tyrants could have killed him. That's one time. The second time is that there were generals that the masses were angry at for complicated reasons, and the people wanted to charge them with a crime. And he said, they didn't do anything illegal. I will not vote to prosecute them for a crime. Both times he risked his life. Both times he made more enemies, but he did it because he knew it was the right thing to do. So that's 2 times. The third time, though, is the whole dialogue we're reading, the whole thing we're reading. You've seen what he's doing is he's telling the people, again, what they don't want to hear. He is telling the jury members that they're ignorant of the true good and that Socrates is pursuing that. So he's risking his life in the way he's addressing the jury here. So 3 times in 20 pages, you see examples, actual actions of Socrates not fearing death. Socrates is all about the phrase death before dishonor. He didn't come up with that phrase, but I think it's a good way to summarize. He proves in his life, and remember, philosophy is a way of life, different from the common way of life. He proves in his way of life that he would rather die than do something dishonorable. Okay. So I know I've been teaching for a long time. I know that not every student does the readings. Often students, for whatever reasons, don't do the readings, but then they come to class, or in our class, they listen to these recordings, and then they get a good summary. Okay? If you didn't do the reading, here's what happens next. The jury finds Socrates guilty. Remember, he said, I have the truth. The charges are false, but I bet I won't be able to convince you because we have such a short time together. And he says, but I'm going to try to defend myself. That's what apology means in ancient language. It means a defense, not an apology, a self-defense. He says, I'm going to defend myself the best way I can. But he goes, but I probably won't convince you. Well, he didn't convince them, and they found him guilty. Remember, too, this is a sort of fictionalized account of the life of Socrates, but this for sure happened in real life. Socrates was brought up on these charges and was found guilty of them. Okay, so the way it worked in ancient Athens, if you were found guilty of a crime, your accuser got to offer a sentence, and you get to offer a counter sentence or counter assessment, and then the jury picks between those two. So he says, here's what I think the result of my guilt should be. He's like, I told you what I'm guilty of. I'm guilty of biting Athens like a gadfly, trying to wake it up so that it will rouse itself to greatness. He's like, if that's wrong, I don't want to be right. Right? So this is his counter assessment. He says, this is what I think my penalty should be. So I told you before that Socrates is funny and sort of clever and ironic, but always his joke reveals a truth. So his first sort of joking penalty is, he says, I think my penalty, found guilty of these serious crimes, is that you should give me free grub. You should give me free food every day. This is page 15. Okay, and he says, now please, he says, I know this is unpopular. I see the jury doesn't like this, but he says, I think that's the true penalty I should get. Penalties should match the crime. In this case, there's no crime but innocence, so the matching result should be a reward. I'm doing something good here. And he says, you already feed athletes, so if you won in the Olympics, one of the prizes was that you'd get free food. And he says, athletes only think you, this is page 15. He says, athletes only make you think that you're happy, but I in fact make you happy in reality. That's page 15. What he means is when you see an athlete do well, you feel happy, but it's not like your life is actually going better, right? It's not like something in your own personal life has improved just because someone else, the athlete, did something good. And he says, I'm actually trying to help people through truth live better. That's a real benefit to them. So I should at least get the benefit that the athletes get. Okay, so he goes, I know you aren't going to like this, and I know you don't believe me that I'm innocent. And he says, but why do you not believe me, jury? He says, it's not because I'm saying falsehoods. I'm arguing quite clearly for the truth of everything I'm saying. The reason you won't believe me, jury members, is that the truth takes time. He says, we've only got about an hour or so, and that's not enough time to convince you of a lifetime of false persuasion. Now, I've got a little question for you here. Not a discussion question, just floating the idea. Do you think 16 weeks, about 4 months, is enough time to convince you of the value of philosophy? Okay? It may or may not be enough time. So some of you, I'd say about 3/4 of you, are already convinced that philosophy is the best thing, that it's what you're now in love with. Not only are you going to declare a philosophy major, but you're going to write books on it. You're going to travel the world. You love philosophy. Going to preach philosophy at 4 corners of the world. Right? Okay. But there's some of you who aren't yet convinced. I get that. Okay, so now I'm sort of joking around, but a bit like Socrates, my jokes are never funny, but at least try to point towards some truth. Okay? And the truth is this, is that 16 weeks is not going to be enough time to get all of you to love philosophy, but more time will. Because really, when I run into people, you know how it is. In America, we don't define ourselves through what we love. We define ourselves through our jobs. So when you first meet someone, they always ask, oh, what's your job? What do you do? And I tell them, I'm a philosophy professor. And I'm not joking. There's 2 main responses. One is from people who haven't taken philosophy and they say, well, what is it? And then many times from people who have taken it, they say, you know what? I took a class or 2 of philosophy in college because it was required. And they said, I didn't love it at the time, but now I wish I would have taken more classes. I'm really not kidding. That's a very common response, probably the majority of the time when someone has taken philosophy. They say, now I see the value of it. And I don't think it's because they're older and wiser, because I would not say that your youth makes you unwise. I think it's just in life, they've ran into things where they realized that something they learned in philosophy actually was useful and valuable to them. Or they started wondering as time went on about some of these big ideas that didn't seem so pressing when they're so busy with everything else in college. But as time goes on, they started wondering about death, about family, about the real value of money, and these things started meaning more and more to them. Okay. So I just want to say, college is the perfect time to take philosophy seriously. I know you're all super busy, okay? But a lot of you have just gotten out of your parents' house or have recently started college that you're paying for yourself, paying a lot of money for yourself. And so you are making those kind of big money decisions for yourself, many of you for the first time. A lot of you aren't married yet and don't have kids yet. A lot of you are meeting new people. Well, all of you are meeting new people. And seeing new places. You might have moved to go to Ball State and are seeing new things. Okay, it's the perfect time with all this newness to newly evaluate your life and what matters to you. Okay, so two almost opposite things I'm saying here, but they fit together. One is that I do understand that you may not love philosophy or love wisdom by the time our class is done. But many people do later on come to really appreciate the philosophy they got earlier. Now, the thing that's almost opposite to that is that now is actually the perfect time for you to try to throw yourself into philosophy and to love it as much as you can. So, just simmer in that for a while, right? Just let that float for a second. Okay. So, the jury found Socrates guilty. He proposed a counter penalty, sort of joking, of free food. And he says, yeah, you're not going to go for that. My friends have offered to pay a fine for me because I'm broke. They'll pay a fine. It'd be a few $1,000s if I've done my math right. We'll pay a fine. Okay. Now, the prosecution floated the possible penalty of death. He floated the joking penalty of free food and then said, okay, I'll pay a fine. The jury found that he should pay the penalty of death. Once more, if you didn't do the reading, which I'm not happy if you didn't do the reading, but I know it happens. Okay? If you didn't do the reading, they sentenced him to death for philosophy. They killed him. They did carry this out. They killed him for his ideas. Socrates was sentenced to death and they poisoned him. That's how they killed him. Because he thought unusual ideas and shared them in public with other people. Can you believe this? This is what happened to Socrates, and it doesn't only happen to Socrates. So sometimes I have students who, at this point in class, they'll go, hey, I'm sorry they killed your boy Socrates, right? You know, I know you claim to be a lover of wisdom too. I'm sorry they killed your boy, but that kind of stuff doesn't go on anymore. This is 2,500 years ago, man. Like, people were backwards back then. So, okay, they did that 2,500 years ago. We don't have to worry about that kind of stuff anymore. But that's not the case. This still happens. So we'll see. There's other philosophers who this happens to. For instance, in the 17th century, it happened to people like Descartes. Now, you might think that's ancient history, but remember, that's when people start colonizing America, start showing up in America. It's the same time. And yes, partly America is about getting away from stuff like that, but it's also the people who saw that happening, and some of them thought it was a good thing to do, that then moved to America. Okay, so in the 17th century, this is very common. Now you might say, I would disagree, but you might say 17th century is ancient history, buddy. But it still happens. It happened in the 90s in South Africa when they jailed Nelson Mandela. It happened in the 60s in America. That's 60 years ago. Less than 60 years ago with Jim Crow. It happens in contemporary countries like China, Russia, Iran, lots of other countries. Oh, Saudi Arabia is really what I was thinking of with the killing of the journalist, but Iran jails dissidents as well. So the threat of thinkers, the threat of ideas still annoys and scares the ignorant and powerful across the globe. I think it happens less in the US than it happens other places, but it is not absent here. Okay? So in the US, we don't throw people really in jail anymore for having scary, unpopular ideas, but we do still mock them. We ignore their ideas, and we defund. We make sure money doesn't go to these unusual ideas. This happens across the world. The standard rewards and punishments today and the standard people who get punished are exactly the same as they were in ancient Greece. The masses still, if they don't like something, if something's unpopular, or if they don't understand it, they try to punish it by taking money away from it, like they tried to find Socrates, and by denouncing it as wrong just because it's unpopular. But it's a mistake to think that just because something is unpopular, it is therefore false or wrong. Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideas were very unpopular, but he was right. Jesus' ideas about loving your neighbor, about loving everyone equally, were very unpopular, but they're right. The list goes on and on and on. And it's still what's said about philosophy majors. You're never going to make any money from that, so they try to scare people by saying you will not have money, you should love money, and you will not have money. And they say, yeah, but you want fries with that, right? Like it's a silly major. Your parents will, laugh at you if you say you want to major in it. The same thing's true for fine arts. If you want to study English, history, etc. People say, but that's useless. You'll never get anywhere with that. Well, never get anywhere in what sense? You'll never get anywhere in terms of money, and you'll never get anywhere in terms of popularity or praise and acclaim from normal people. But remember, Socrates says, I'm not here for the money. I wasn't born to make money, and I'm not here for the praise of the crowd. That's not my destiny or my sacred task. It's the truth, and the truth he's willing to die for. That's why he's here. Okay. So Socrates says, and with the sort of bummer we just went through, that unusual but true ideas are still silenced around the world. They're still met with violence, and threats about money and popularity still happens across the world. But here's the uplift part. Socrates says, you can kill me, but that will not silence the truth. On 17, he says, you are wrong if you believe that by killing people, you will prevent anyone from reproaching you for not living the right or true way. He says, to escape these kinds of tests is impossible. Okay? He says, really, you should be preparing yourself to be as good as possible instead of trying to silence people who tell you and teach you how to be good. Okay? Okay. Page 16, moving forward a little bit. Socrates is found guilty. And then I want you to reread this section and look at it. Do you see how calm he remains? He doesn't get angry with his accusers or the jury. He doesn't cry or wail or weep. In the longer version of this parts I cut out, there's long sections about how he doesn't bawl his eyes out when he's found guilty. So I wish if someone sentenced me to death on false charges, that I could be that rational and calm and collected. Okay, but Socrates could. Again, he did philosophy for 70 years before they killed him. I'm new, quote, new at the game and only have been doing it for about 22 to about 20 years, not quite 20 years. Okay. He's better at it than I am, to be honest. Okay. So then Socrates says, this is as close as he gets to like a snapback or losing his temper, and it's not that really at all. On 17, he says, okay, I leave you now. I've been condemned to death by you, but you have been condemned by truth to your wickedness and injustice, on page 17. Okay? That's how he leaves. That's his sort of final rejoinder to them. And he's not mad. He's not sad even. He's not angry. Because philosophy has given him this peace of the soul. It has removed the fear of death. So he has nothing to fear or cry or get angry about. That's the power of philosophy. Okay, so we're very nearly done. Just a few more things. So remember, we've said that Socrates says that he personally is not scared of death, and he gave some reasons why. We covered one of those, and now he approaches it in a different way and says, well, we can guess at what death might be, and then we can guess at whether it's truly good or bad. Okay, so here's this big question. He says, is death truly a good or bad thing? Now, I want you to see this because this is a standard philosophical move that he makes here. He says, well, if we're unsure what death is, let's take each thing that it could be and treat them individually. We'll say, if death is this certain way, one way, we'll analyze whether it's good or bad. But because we don't know if it's that one certain way, we'll say, well, what if it's this other way? And then we'll see if that's good or bad. And then we'll have a better idea of the question. So imagine we say, what is death? That's a super philosophy question, right? It's sort of abstract, it's deep, and it's hard to answer. Well, when a question's that big, deep, and hard to answer, a standard philosophy move, this is philosophy 100 here, this is a standard philosophy move that you should know, is you divide a complex, tough to answer question up into smaller parts. You take a small enough bite that you can chew on it for a while, okay, that you can simplify or shrink down enough that you can answer that smaller question, okay, and that you can convince or discuss with others that same claim until you can get some kind of agreement on it, okay? Then you move on to another small portion, okay? You work on that small piece until you can discover the truth of it and talk to others about it and agree, okay? Then you keep doing that, and then you add all the little pieces that you found certain answers that we can all agree upon. You add them together in a way that'll answer the bigger question. Okay, that's the general philosophy technique there. So let's apply that technique to the big, deep, abstract question of what is death? Is it good or bad? Okay, so before you ever say whether something's good or bad, you have to be able to say what it is in its truth. So he says, what is death? Well, death probably is one of two things. It's either going to heaven or it's nothing. And again, these are smaller ideas that we can manage instead of the big idea that is too hard to manage. We're just going to deal with small questions here. What if death is nothing? And he says, if death is nothing, then it's not bad. And in fact, it's probably pretty good because it's peaceful. No more stress, right? No more finals. No more drama with your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? If death is nothing, it's nothing to fear because it's peaceful. It's a good thing. He says, okay, we've answered that one small little part. Let's move on to the next small part. What if death is heaven? And he says, well, if death is heaven, then it's better than good. It's the greatest blessing is what he calls it on page 18. Okay, so again, be patient with philosophy because the only way you're going to answer these questions is if you go slowly, step by step. Is death good or bad? Take a next step. If we want to answer whether death is good or bad, we first have to answer what death is. Next small step. Well, death is probably one of two things. It's either heaven or it's nothing. Take the next step. Let's tackle first the small question of what happens if it's nothing. If death is nothing, then it's good. Let's tackle the next small step. If death is heaven, then it's very good. It's the greatest blessing. Okay, so if death is probably nothing or heaven, and nothing is good and heaven is great, then death is either good or great. Next step. If something is good or great, it is not something to be feared. Next step. If death is not something to be feared, then I personally do not need to fear death. See how we broke down a seemingly impossible to answer question and then answered it? That's how philosophy works. It's not just opinions. I don't like death. It's little arguments step by step that add up what we can agree on to other things we can't agree on, so that the overall package is it's like a cake made up of a bunch of different ingredients. But if you're not allergic to each one of the ingredients, you can't be allergic to the whole cake, right? Okay, so if you agree with each one of these little baby steps, then you agree with the whole package deal. You can eat the cake at the end. You can have it and eat it too. Okay? That's philosophy. Okay. We're almost done here. Okay? Please notice that Socrates says the best part about heaven is that part of what's so great about heaven is that there he could keep talking with others as he does here on earth. This guy is amazing. He is so singular-minded. He is so fascinated and obsessed with getting knowledge by talking to other people that he says, you know what would be dope about heaven? That I could talk to people up there and see what they know and keep learning even in heaven. Okay, he says, quote, page 18, there I could spend my time testing and examining people. What one would not give for that opportunity to examine others. Okay? This is what he thinks is awesome about heaven, is that he could keep talking to people in heaven to see what they know. And there's this little joke at the end. He goes, well, shoot, at least they wouldn't put me to death for asking these kinds of questions in heaven. They couldn't kill me. I'm already dead. Right? Okay. Again, the joke hides the truth. He's saying, in heaven where justice and goodness reign, I would not be put to death for asking these questions. Here on earth, where a lack of justice and a lack of goodness and a lack of knowledge are in charge, they do put people to death for this sort of thing. Again, the joke always includes a truth. Okay? This is what I want to remind you of, and this is, I promise, my final short point. Socrates' love of wisdom is a passion that defines him. Okay? He can't stop talking to the youth in Athens before the trial. He refuses the punishment of don't talk anymore like this within the trial. He says, if you exile me to another place, I would have to. I can't help it. It's a passion. I would have to keep talking this way in exile in a foreign city. He also, I didn't point this out, but it's in the reading, after he's found guilty, he continues talking philosophically with his friends while the court is shuffling around paperwork. And he says that a great thing about heaven is that he could keep talking philosophically in the same way. Don't you want to love something that much? Don't you want to be as passionate and driven about something as Socrates is about wisdom and philosophy? Most of us pass through our lives sort of lukewarm. We're sort of into this and then we drop it, and we're sort of into that. We have a job that sometimes is interesting and sometimes is boring. We've got friends who we sometimes want to hang out with, and other times they just annoy us. That's what life is for the common mass of people. But through philosophy, through some kind of truth, you can find something to be deeply passionate about, something that you could pursue and be willing to die for. That sounds like a vibrant life to me. That sounds like a kind of life worth living. Socrates lived that kind of life through philosophy. He also showed that he didn't just think these ideas, but lived them, and that he was willing to die for them proves his passion to such a degree that we still talk about him now, about 2,500 years later. That's the value of the life of Socrates. It shows love and passion in its perfected form. That's what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you, everyone. We'll speak again soon.